Remember driving by the local diner and your mother saying there's safer and tastier food at home? Some food safety disasters proved that our mothers were right. So let's go through some of the worst food scandals to date. People in the Pacific and the Northwest may remember the Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak. Imagine having E. coli attached to your brand name. It truly was a bad time for Jack in the Box. They were apparently serving ground beef patties which contained samples of E. coli and a particularly dangerous strain known as Escherichia coli. This one causes kidney failure among many other side effects, and people were eating their patties on the daily. In the end, over 700 people were affected, and several sued after contracting E. coli. In total, 4 people died from consuming the contaminated food. Most people seem to agree that the problem started with the meat packaging and butchering department, but either way, the public suffered badly. So did the brand, which had to pay over $50 million in settlements to people whose lives it had endangered. This would not be the only case of E. coli that the American public had to suffer, but it was definitely one of the most prolific ones ever recorded in history. Jack in the Box was a very trusted brand that people did not think would fail them, yet this scandal flawed their perception. After a very widespread E. coli scare, people definitely started changing their outlook on the company. It really is surprising what just a few bad pieces of food supply can do in terms of damage. In 1919, canned olives caused 3 deadly outbreaks of botulism, leading to deaths across the nation. Many people didn't even realize they were infected. Before this happened, most of the U.S. treated botulism like a rare disease, more of a medical afterthought that it did not have to worry about on a national level. This led to nationwide distrust of canned food, and it was a terrible time for this to happen, as economic uncertainty had many people relying on canned goods. These outbreaks lasted until 1925, and they posed a significant health risk. Canned olives were an incredibly popular ingredient to use in family meals, banquets, gatherings, snacks, sandwiches, and just about everything that Americans typically would eat in that era. As a result, having it get infected the way it did meant that despite being a short-lived outbreak, the botulism scare hurt a lot of folks. Industry leaders even hired botulism specialists to inquire on how to restore their products and get them up to standard in attempts to salvage goodwill and the image of the company. Jack in the Box was not the only company that suffered from the widespread outbreak of E. coli, and even the biggest names in the fast food industry could not escape the plague. We are talking about the McDonald's outbreak of 1993, which ended up claiming 4 people's lives and hospitalizing hundreds of others. They had beef, which had already been overtaken by the bacterium, and this was again the fault of the meat packing facilities. Most stock that comes in, which carries diseases, usually catches it at either the packing stage or the butchering one. McDonald's had to answer to hundreds of raging people who blamed it for not having better safety standards and not checking their supply of beef, and even if people did not die from it, they did have to pay way more than necessary in medical fees and had to face a lot of damage from having E. coli. In short, it was a terrible time to be a burger fan. You hear all this bad stuff about the dangers of eating ground beef from companies that mass-produce beef products every day, and you feel like maybe it is time to pick up nuts and dry fruit. What do you do when even your peanuts end up giving you salmonella? This was a very real and even more recent dilemma that people had to face in 46 states during 2008. The U.S. Peanut Corporation of America was a well-known peanut processing company headquartered in Georgia. They had started to receive reports of some customers complaining about contracting salmonella after eating peanut products. After it was found out that PCA was the source of this, they had to stop operations completely, and the company has since been shut down. It's shocking that a company earning $25 million annually could be responsible for one of the worst outbreaks in American history and shut down in the same year. Rathor was this cure-all, end-all energy drink that was pitched by William J. A. Bailey to be the next big thing that Americans needed to get by their day. It was supposed to be this health tonic which, if the advertisements were true, sounded downright magical, helping out with arthritis, fatigue, nausea, and migraines. It sounded like a liquid version of Panadol. The drink itself was just a distilled mix of water and radium in an era where the effects of radiation just were not properly observed. The scandal started with Eben Byers, who was a wealthy industrialist that started using Rathor in 1927 and soon became a devoted drinker of it every day. Over time, without him noticing, radiation poisoning began to occur and eventually his jaw started to disintegrate. Do you know how severe the poisoning has to be for the next stage, which is holes in your skull? Eben Byers went out in a miserable way, and that is just one of many people that got caught with Rathor-induced radiation poisoning. Sometimes authors expose harmful corporate activities, and that's exactly what Upton Sinclair did with The Jungle. He put this book out in 1906, and it became a groundbreaking exposé on the horrific standards of the meatpacking industry that was developing at breakneck speeds in America. Immigrant workers in Chicago stockyards, unsanitary practices, violations of health and food safety laws. It caused some massive public outrage. This led to widespread protests and reforms. Sinclair worked pretty hard for his information too, and went undercover working in those stockyards in 1904 to get first-hand experience of what he was writing about. His book details how spoiled and diseased meat was sold under false labels and how companies mixed borax and formaldehyde to preserve meat that had gone bad. They would make immigrants do all of this while paying them almost nothing, often having them work in really unsafe and dirty environments too. With his book, he ended up showing how the meatpacking industry was complicit in many outbreaks of serious diseases. The 1990 Cranberry Contamination issue had ethylene dibromide at the center, which was a pesticide that had seized several cranberry crops all over the nation. If you grew up around a lot of Thanksgiving culture in the 90s, you will know that cranberry sales tend to go up massively during the stretch of holidays from Thanksgiving to Christmas. Everybody wants cranberry sauce, juice, and other dishes that make a star out of the fruit, and this scandal managed to occur right before Thanksgiving. Although ethylene dibromide had been used as a pesticide in previous years, the Environmental Protection Agency banned it in 1984 after discovering that it was a carcinogen, potentially increasing cancer rates and causing reproductive issues in animals. While the FDA tried their best to do damage control and reassure the public, a lot of people had been affected by the poor crops, and cranberry sales went down massively across the nation that year. One of the worst outbreaks in recent memory was the 1998 Listeria outbreak, caused by contaminated hot dogs and deli meats found in many ready-to-go meals. It was terrible, especially because these kinds of meals were a big part of the American diet and culture, as people of all ages and backgrounds would usually get hot dogs mid-work or school and deli meats to satiate their hunger. They did not know they were putting themselves at risk of listeriosis, and the blame for the crisis ended up falling squarely on Bilmar Foods. This was a subsidiary of the Sara Lee Corporation, and it was one of the biggest producers of processed meats. There ended up being 101 cases of listeriosis, several miscarriages of which 6 were reported, and 21 deaths in total. In 1998, Sara Lee sold around 35 million pounds of hot dogs and deli meats, so just imagine how much filth was really going around. The 1999 orange juice Salmonella outbreak was a foodborne illness that had been linked to orange juice which was loaded with Salmonella mention, a particularly violent variant of an already dangerous disease. It had been associated with massive gastrointestinal damage and making the body more vulnerable to sickness in that area, and in this particular year, there were 207 confirmed cases of the strain of Salmonella. That was only what was reported, and the actual number may have been near the thousands. A lot of people do drink orange juice pretty frequently, after all, and many states were ground zero, such as California, Arizona, and Washington. Indiana and the Midwest got the short end of the stick, too. It seems a company known as Sun Orchard was responsible for the incident, as they had been serving orange juice made from oranges that were not pasteurized. You know, the entire point of that is to kill off dirty bacteria like ones that carry Salmonella. After reading all of this, are you thinking that maybe it might just be a more intelligent decision to hold off on the canned, the frozen, processed, and the widely cultivated products we are used to? Maybe we should all just migrate to Club Sparkling Water and stay there, except even that has been involved in an outbreak. The 1990 Perrier Benzene contamination was a food safety scare of the century because it gave the public hard proof that a carcinogenic chemical known as benzene was sitting and chilling in their dearly beloved sparkling water. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture did some intensive testing in 1990 to confirm this and found out that benzene levels in Perrier's bottles exceeded the Environmental Protection Agency's standards. Their benchmark is 5 parts per billion in a bottle, and Perrier was peddling at 15 ppb. Perrier ended up recalling 160 million bottles from 120 countries and tried to blame it on a faulty filter at a French bottling plant. Though this was obviously not true, and bad practices were found in the company's work. If we backtrack just 9 years ago, soon to be 10, we will find that Listeria still plagues many American food companies and industries. The 2015 Bluebell Listeria Outbreak was a wake-up call for people who loved sweets, and for official regulatory bodies to start getting their act together and passing stricter laws and sanitation protocols. Bluebell's ice cream products were a pretty nationally beloved item that people bought regularly in their grocery trips, and a lot of their ice cream had come down with a bad case of Listeria monocytogenes. Sounds like a mouthful, right? The disease spreads listeriosis, and the outbreak led to 3 deaths, a nationwide recall of any Bluebell product sold in 2015, and several states catching the infection. This bacteria can survive in cold facilities, and it is especially dangerous for those with weakened immune systems, which includes a significant portion of the population. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the FDA found contaminated products in their Oklahoma and Texas production plants. Bluebell laid off 1,400 employees, shut down for a year, and spent millions of dollars on settlements and upgrading their factories. Even their CEO, Paul Cruz, ended up being sued for concealing information. The 2006 U.S. spinach outbreak was a severe case of E. coli contamination, and the specific strain, Escherichia coli O157, is particularly harmful to the elderly, pregnant women, children, and anyone with a weakened immune system. There were 206 reported cases and 3 deaths across multiple states, including California and Texas, making August 2006 a dangerous time to consume spinach. The FDA conducted multiple investigations to determine the source of the contamination, and by September 14th, they issued public warnings to avoid fresh spinach and recalled several products. Many distributors and retailers had been affected. Eventually, they traced the source of the contamination to spinach grown in Salinas Valley, California, where water runoff caused the outbreak. The spinach industry as a whole lost $100 million, and they introduced much stricter protocols for greens from then onwards with a focus on water testing. The 2003 hepatitis A outbreak, linked to green onions, was a stark reminder that even nationally grown and produced foods can pose significant risks. This is why food safety practices are so important. But people who were not aware of that before, this just happily brought their produce anyway, thinking it was fresh and clean. After all, who stops to inspect every vegetable they end up needing for the week? The onions, imported from Mexico, were contaminated with the hepatitis A virus, and by the end of the month, more than 600 cases had been reported across half the states in the country. We know of 30 people that were hospitalized, but who knows how many were out there who needed it and could not get the right health care? Cases appeared in California, Nevada, New Mexico, and many other states. In 2003, the California Department of Health thought something had to be done and began investigating. Once they established a link to the supply chain, there were stronger inspections and much stricter regulations from then onwards. In 1987, the Beech Nut Nutrition Corporation had some developments that helped it grow into the baby food success that it is known as now in the industry. This started when the Heinz Celestial Group acquired the company, and the Celestials themselves were an organic product-based company. In line with the MO of its new owners, Beech Nut began emphasizing natural products more and started to include various combinations in its baby food for flavors. It wanted to capture different tastes for different kids so that even a 2- and 6-year-old could enjoy the product. Of course, when the company had built so much goodwill as being an accessible and affordable option for your baby's nutrition. So it was a countrywide heartbreak when it was found out that they were violating FDA laws by using flavored sugar and artificial flavorings in their baby food. The FDA ended up cracking down on beechnut pretty hard and asked them to regulate their products better, as well as changing the labeling to avoid misinformation, but the damage to public trust had already been done. This is also why they rebranded as this all-natural goody two-shoes company. The Tylenol cyanide poisonings of 1982 were a pretty horrifying ordeal that even affected over-the-counter medication and food, especially Tylenol. It was found that there was serious product tampering, and the pharmaceutical industry had to go through much stricter safety regulations, public health practices, and much worse testing and quality checking as a result too. In September 1982, many people in Chicago began experiencing severe symptoms after taking extra-strength Tylenol capsules. There were many victims, including a 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman, who and many adults were hospitalized. That contaminated batch of Tylenol wreaked havoc on whoever took it. Authorities started to investigate the deaths of these people and found proof of tampering. Johnson & Johnson, which was the parent company, had to take security measures and went through a lot of scrutiny for their terrible practices. They had a pretty quick response, which helped keep matters calmer and more civil, but a lot of consumer trust was already gone, and the families that were damaged did not recover either. It was a massive controversy that sparked a lot of regulatory changes in product safety and the pharmaceutical field overall. That wraps up 15 horror stories that our mothers might quote the next time we drive by a fast food chain. If you are just as surprised as us, subscribe, and let's hope these memories do not repeat.